The night of February 26, 2012. Sanford, Florida. A quiet residential neighborhood. The dim glow of streetlights reflected off the damp pavement. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary that night except for one 911 call. A call that changed everything. At 7:09 p.m., a 17-year-old teenager walked into a 7-Eleven convenience store. He wore a gray hoodie, picked up a pack of Skittles and a can of Arizona iced tea, then walked out. A simple routine action, yet these were the last moments of his life. His name was Trayvon Martin. He was walking home, less than 10 minutes away. But at that very moment, a man sitting inside an SUV nearby was watching him. That man was George Zimmerman. Zimmerman was a neighborhood watch volunteer, not a police officer. He had no badge, no real authority, but he did have one thing that mattered, a gun. And more than that, he had fear. At 7:11 p.m., Zimmerman picked up his phone and called 911. There's a guy here. He looks real suspicious, just walking around, looking about. He looks like he's up to no good. Good. The dispatcher asked, "Are you following him?" "Yeah, you don't need to do that." But Zimmerman didn't stop. He got out of his car. He stepped into the darkness. He followed the teenager walking home. Just minutes later, a gunshot rang out, and Trayvon Martin collapsed to the ground. When police arrived, Zimmerman stood there, gun in hand. Trayvon lay dead. No weapon, no criminal intent, just a bag of Skittles lying on the ground beside him. But the most shocking part? The man who shot him was not arrested that night. This is the story of Trayvon Martin, a black teenager killed because he looked suspicious. A case that shook America. A case that sparked a nationwide debate on justice, race, and a legal system that does not serve everyone equally. This is Mysterious Cases, and today I'm going to tell you this story. When police arrived at the scene, Trayvon Martin lay motionless on the ground, his face pressed against the damp grass, a pool of blood slowly spreading across his hoodie, and beside him, a bag of Skittles and a can of Arizona iced tea. Standing just a few feet away was George Zimmerman, his gun still in his hand. He didn't run. He didn't panic. As officers approached, he simply said, "I shot him. It was self-defense." Police took Zimmerman to the station for questioning, but just a few hours later, he was released without charges. The reason? Authorities claim that he acted under Florida's Stand Your Ground law, a law that allows someone to use deadly force if they feel threatened. But the question is, was Zimmerman really in danger? Zimmerman claimed that Trayvon attacked him first, that the teenager punched him to the ground and slammed his head against the pavement. But when the autopsy results came out, they told a very different story. Trayvon had no signs of being in a violent fight. No blood on his hands. No injuries suggesting he had hit anyone hard enough to cause serious damage. And Zimmerman? A small cut on the back of his head. But nothing that suggested his head had been bashed repeatedly against concrete, like he claimed. So what really happened? Why did Zimmerman leave his car to follow Trayvon, despite being told not to? Why would an unarmed teenager suddenly attack a man carrying a gun? And most importantly, why was the man who killed Trayvon allowed to walk free that very night? As news of the case spread, outrage erupted across the country. A black teenager was dead, but his killer wasn't even charged. Trayvon's family demanded justice. They called for a new investigation. But police stood by their decision. Zimmerman had broken no laws. So the protests began. Small gatherings turned into massive crowds. People wore gray hoodies in Trayvon's memory. They held up bags of Skittles and cans of Arizona iced tea, the last things he ever bought. And they chanted one phrase, "Justice for Trayvon Martin." The movement spread across America. Under immense pressure, 6 weeks after Trayvon's death, officials had no choice but to reopen the case. On April 11th, 2012, George Zimmerman was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. But this was just the beginning, because what followed was a legal battle that would divide a nation. And in the end, the verdict would shock America to its core. June 24th, 2013, after months of waiting, the trial of George Zimmerman officially began. But this was no ordinary murder case. It had become the focal point of an entire nation. A trial that would not only determine the fate of one man, but also expose the injustices within the legal system. The jury consisted of 6 women, but not a single black juror. This immediately raised a crucial question. Was this truly a fair trial? The prosecutor stood before the court, pointed at Zimmerman, and declared, George Zimmerman was not a police officer. He had no authority to enforce the law, but he decided to make himself the judge, the jury, and the executioner. They argued that Trayvon had done nothing wrong. He was simply walking home. The most important piece of evidence was Zimmerman's 911 call. At that moment, Trayvon had no idea he was being followed. But Zimmerman followed him anyway. He got out of his car despite being told not to. The prosecutor posed a critical question. Who was the aggressor? A teenager walking home or a grown man with a gun? They claimed that Zimmerman had already decided Trayvon was a threat, not because of his actions, but because of his skin color. But would the jury accept this argument? The defense fights back. Zimmerman's lawyers countered aggressively. They insisted that Zimmerman wasn't the hunter, he was the victim. They claimed that Trayvon attacked Zimmerman first, describing a violent struggle in which Trayvon punched Zimmerman, knocking him to the ground and slamming his head against the pavement. Zimmerman, they argued, had no choice but to shoot in self-defense. They also emphasized Florida's Stand Your Ground law, which allows someone to use deadly force if they believe their life is in danger. This raised a chilling reality, because if the law justified Zimmerman's actions, then that meant Trayvon Martin never had a chance to survive that night. The jury deliberates, and a shocking verdict. The deliberations lasted for several days. Millions of Americans watched every moment, waiting for justice. Then on July 13, 2013, the jury delivered their final decision. George Zimmerman, not guilty. America was in shock. Zimmerman was acquitted. He walked out of the courtroom a free man. And Trayvon? He never got the chance to tell his side of the story. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in rage. Thousands took to the streets chanting, "Where is the justice? Justice for Trayvon. Black Lives Matter." From this moment, the Black Lives Matter movement ignited, becoming one of the largest civil rights struggles in modern American history. But could it change the justice system? And more importantly, does justice truly exist? July 13th, 2013, George Zimmerman walked out of the courtroom a free man. Meanwhile, outside, thousands of people stood in anger, despair, and shock. They couldn't believe it. An unarmed black teenager was shot dead, yet the shooter was acquitted. A question echoed across America. If Trayvon Martin had been a white boy, would the verdict have been different? From this injustice, a movement began to rise. Just days after the verdict, the hashtag Black Lives Matter appeared on social media. At first, it was just as an expression of outrage, but soon it became a symbol of the fight against racial injustice and police brutality. Millions took to the streets, from New York to Los Angeles, from Chicago to Miami. They wore gray hoodies and held up bags of Skittles and cans of Arizona iced tea. They weren't just demanding justice for Trayvon Martin, they were demanding justice for all the black lives lost to an unjust system. But did America truly change? After his acquittal, George Zimmerman became a highly controversial figure. Some saw him as a misunderstood man acting in self-defense, but to many others, he was a murderer who walked free because of his race. Zimmerman began making media appearances, proudly talking about what he had done. Then, in one of the most outrageous moments, he put the very gun he used to kill Trayvon Martin up for auction, calling it a piece of American history. The final selling price? Over $250,000. This act ignited more public outrage than ever before. As for Trayvon's family, they would never get to see their son every day. They couldn't get justice for him in court, but they refused to give up. They established the Trayvon Martin Foundation, fighting for young black lives, so that no one else would have to suffer the same fate as their son. More than 10 years have passed since Trayvon Martin was killed, yet America is still haunted by similar tragedies. 2014, Michael Brown, an 18-year-old black teenager, shot and killed by police in Ferguson. 2020, George Floyd suffocated to death by a police officer's knee in Minneapolis. 2023, Tyre Nichols beaten to death by police officers right outside his own home, and the list continues to grow. So, where's justice? Does the legal system truly treat everyone equally? Or was Trayvon Martin just another name forgotten over time? His name was Trayvon Martin. He was just 17 years old. He was unarmed. He was holding a bag of Skittles and a can of Arizona iced tea. And he should still be alive today.